Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophets Isaiah chapter 20 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're going to dive into a super intense, incredibly specific moment in ancient history that honestly carries some profound meaning for us even today. Now, it's a really short chapter. We're talking only 6 verses here, but let me tell you, it completely shocks the senses. It really forces us to take a hard look at exactly where we place our ultimate trust when the world around us just seems to be falling apart. Here is the game plan for this explainer. First, we'll establish the context with Sargon and Ashdod. Then, we'll methodically analyze the single chapter from beginning to end, checking out verses 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, and finally 5 and 6. After that, we'll extract the key ideas and life lessons and wrap the whole thing up with a quick chapter summary. Section 1. Context: Sargon and Ashdod. Okay, before we even look at the very first verse, we absolutely have to anchor ourselves in the historical backdrop of the ancient Near East. You really just can't understand this chapter without getting a feel for the terrifying reality of the world Isaiah was living in at this exact moment. Picture this, a geopolitical landscape where the Assyrian Empire is expanding aggressively. And I mean aggressively. Assyria wasn't just a strong nation. They were the absolute undisputed superpower of the day. They were a relentless military machine, completely infamous for their brutal siege warfare and, frankly, psychological terror. They crushed pretty much everything in their path. So King Sargon, the ruthless ruler of Assyria, orders a massive military campaign westward. And his target? The coastal city of Ashdod, which was a really vital Philistine stronghold. The Assyrian army is marching. You can practically see the dust from their chariots on the horizon, and the smaller nations in the region, they are in an absolute panic. These tiny kingdoms know for a fact they cannot stand alone against Sargon. They are desperately looking for someone, anyone, to save them from what looks like certain destruction. Now, as we get ready to actually read the text, we're going to encounter a very specific word right off the bat: Tartan. To really grasp that first verse, we need to clarify that a Tartan is not a person's first name. It's a title. It translates to a supreme military commander, or basically a commander-in-chief, sent directly by King Sargon himself. This detail is absolutely crucial. It tells us that Sargon isn't just sending a small raiding party or some minor official. No, he is sending his absolute top general with a massive, overwhelming force to lay siege to Ashdod. The threat level here is literally at its absolute peak. Section 2, verses 1 and 2. Now that the stage is set and the Assyrian war machine is on the march, let's jump into the highly unusual command God gives to his prophet right in the thick of this war. We are going straight to the plain meaning, the pashats of the original text. No complex symbolism or hidden mystical meanings in this explainer. We're just looking at exactly what the text says happened, starting with verses 1 and 2. Let's read this together carefully. In the year that Tartan came into Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and he fought against Ashdod and took it. At that time the Lord spoke by Isaiah the son of Amos, saying, "Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put thy shoe from off thy foot." And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. So the chapter opens with the successful Assyrian attack on Ashdod. The city falls, and right at that exact moment of supreme crisis and regional terror, God gives this highly surprising directive to Isaiah. He tells him to literally strip off his sackcloth, which, by the way, was that traditional rough, hairy garment worn by prophets, usually as a sign of mourning or repentance, and to take off his shoes. And what does Isaiah do? He obeys without hesitation. He walks completely stripped of his outer garments and barefoot, right out in public. Let's just break down the sheer drama of this moment for a second. To keep it super simple, the Assyrian army successfully attacks Ashdod. And in response to this catastrophic geopolitical event, God doesn't just give Isaiah some soaring speech or a poetic sermon to deliver. No, God tells Isaiah to become a literal physical symbol of extreme vulnerability. By taking off his clothes and his shoes, Isaiah is stripping away his dignity, his personal comfort, and his basic protection against the elements. He essentially becomes a living, breathing, totally inescapable visual prophecy for everyone in the region to see. The prophet is literally embodying the impending reality. Section 3, verses 3 and 4. But why? I mean, what is the purpose of this incredibly extreme behavior? Let's unpack exactly why Isaiah was told to do this. The text continues, "And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot, to be for 3 years a sign and a wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the captives of Egypt, and the exiles of Ethiopia, young and old, naked and barefoot, and with buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt." Wow, okay, the text very clearly explains the action here. First off, we learned this wasn't just a stunt for a day or a week. Isaiah did this for 3 solid years. 3 years. It was a sustained, unavoidable sign and wonder that literally no one could ignore. And it was a direct, horrifying preview of exactly how the people of Egypt and Ethiopia were going to be treated when the terrifying Assyrian army inevitably conquered them and marched them away as prisoners of war. This is a brilliant illustration of the direct parallel God is drawing. On one side, we've got Isaiah's prophetic action, walking stripped and barefoot for 3 long years. On the flip side, we have the impending, grim reality. Egyptian and Ethiopian captives will be led away by the king of Assyria in complete shame and absolute humiliation. Isaiah's temporary, voluntary physical exposure directly mirrors the devastating, literal, and forced humiliation that the incoming Assyrian army is going to inflict upon their prisoners. It's a visual, unmistakable warning of impending doom. Now, you might be asking yourself, why target Egypt and Ethiopia with this message? Well, it's absolutely crucial to understand that in the geopolitical mindset of the ancient Near East, Egypt and Ethiopia were seen as the ultimate protectors. They were the massive, wealthy, incredibly well-armed superpowers down to the south. So smaller coastal nations, like Ashdod, who were understandably terrified of Assyria, naturally looked to Egypt and Ethiopia for military alliances and protection. They figured, hey, Assyria is strong, sure, but Egypt and Ethiopia, they'll save us for sure. So Isaiah's nakedness was this shocking, jarring message to his own people and their neighbors that their so-called invincible saviors were about to be stripped bare and led away in chains. Section 4, verses 5 and 6. Which brings us to the consequence and the exact reaction of the surrounding nations who witnessed this prophetic sign and the eventual fall of their big protectors. Verse 5 reads, "And they shall be dismayed and ashamed because of Ethiopia their expectation and of Egypt their glory." And then verse 6 concludes, "And the inhabitant of this coastland shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whither we fled for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape?" The smaller nations reading the geopolitical map fall into just utter despair when they realize their glorious protectors are just as weak against Assyria as they are. The coastlands, which is referring to the Philistines and the neighboring peoples, are totally dismayed and deeply, deeply ashamed. So the crucial point we have to ask is, why did they put all their trust in Egypt in the first place? Why did these coastal inhabitants place all their hopes of deliverance in a worldly empire rather than looking higher? The truth is they were completely mesmerized by Egypt's vast wealth, their imposing chariots, their long history, and their perceived glory. They treated a human political alliance as their ultimate salvation against the terrifying Assyrian threat, totally forgetting that earthly empires rise and fall. The plain reality of these final verses is the bitter realization of completely defenseless states. The surrounding nations are dismayed. Their expectation, the thing they eagerly hoped in, and their glory, the thing they proudly boasted about, completely and utterly failed them. Total panic sets in on the coastland. The inhabitants ask this terrifying, unanswerable question, how shall we escape? They suddenly discover that the superpowers they blindly trusted are just as vulnerable as they are. And without a worldly protector, they realize there is zero earthly escape from the relentless Assyrian war machine. Section 5, Key Ideas and Life Lessons. Okay, now that we thoroughly understand the historical and textual reality of this chapter, let's translate this ancient geopolitical reliance into some highly practical lessons for our own lives and personal growth. Because, let's be honest, human nature hasn't changed a bit since the days of Isaiah. Just like the ancient coastlands falsely trusted in the imposing chariots of Egypt and the vast wealth of Ethiopia, we have to critically evaluate ourselves. Where do we place our ultimate trust today? Are we placing our faith in fragile modern powers? Maybe in economic wealth, or climbing social status, human institutions, or political alliances? We might look at our bank accounts, our careers, or our political leaders and think they provide this impenetrable shield against the uncertainties of life. And yeah, those things might certainly seem like glory and expectation in the moment, much like Egypt did to Ashdod. But as Isaiah so powerfully demonstrated with his own physical vulnerability, all earthly securities can be stripped bare and led away in an instant. So we can actually improve ourselves by following a simple reflective process here. First, take a moment to deeply identify where you place your ultimate trust. You've got to be brutally honest with yourself about what you rely on to make you feel safe and secure in this totally unpredictable world. Second, firmly recognize the temporary, fleeting nature of worldly power. Just remember that throughout all of history, the seemingly invincible forces, just like the Assyrians who eventually fell themselves, and the glorious Egyptians who were taken captive, are ultimately fragile. Third, consciously and actively shift your reliance away from human expectations and firmly onto the unwavering, eternal strength of the divine. By anchoring ourselves to a higher truth, we find a real security that no worldly crises can ever strip away.
Section 6, Chapter Summary and Recap.
Let's do a really quick step-by-step recap of everything we just covered in this short but incredibly intense chapter. In just 6 verses, we see a remarkably complete narrative unfold. The supreme Assyrian commander, the Tartan, attacks and captures Ashdod. In direct response to this crisis, God commands his prophet Isaiah to walk stripped of his outer garments and barefoot. This highly visible, deeply uncomfortable action acts as a 3-year living sign that Egypt and Ethiopia, the undisputed regional superpowers, will suffer a completely humiliating defeat and be led away as naked captives themselves. Consequently, the surrounding smaller nations, who relied entirely on those mighty superpowers for their salvation, fall into total despair as they realize the ultimate, devastating failure of their worldly alliances. Which leaves us with this final, vital thought. If our greatest worldly hopes can be stripped bare in a single moment, what unshakable foundation remains in your life? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.